Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Bong. I'm here to talk about some of the latest cybersecurity threats. A little bit about me. I work for Sikich. We're a professional services firm with audit, advisory, and technology consulting. I work in our cybersecurity practice. I lead our forensic team, our penetration testing team, and our vulnerability scanning team. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from some of the PCI forensic investigations we've done, as well as investigations of a variety of other clients. We're going to talk about mainly like what was different about the last couple of years in terms of the attack techniques and trends, and then what are some of the new tactics and techniques that the threat actors are using today, and finally some of the key protections that you should know about to defend against those attacks. So how were the last couple of years different? Well, one key thing that was different was unpatched firewall and VPN devices. It seemed like almost every manufacturer in the last couple of years released a new patch or a new vulnerability for their firewall, their VPN, their gateway appliance. These aren't usually that frequent, but there were just a lot of them. And interestingly, a lot of them allowed for things like theft of data from memory or unauthorized connections or things like that. We just really saw a lot of breaches of like VPN access through unpatched firewalls and VPN devices. These really hit hard small and medium businesses, organizations that bought a firewall 2 or 3 years ago, installed it, and didn't really have any process to patch it, to maintain it, to test it. So certainly a lot of kind of unauthorized remote access to networks through those types of attacks. Next one. Critical zero-day vulnerabilities. We're seeing a number, even today, in mature software applications of these zero-day vulnerabilities, weaknesses that are getting exploited actively out in the world, even before patches are available. In some of the earlier ones in like 2021, we even saw where the attackers would infect multiple systems, but then kind of sit and wait and not really make use of those infected systems until months and months later. I don't know if they had so many systems to target or just waiting for the right time, but systems that stayed infected for quite a while. And again, that was back in 2021, but even here in August 2022, we're seeing very frequent zero-day notifications in a lot of kind of popular packages out there. Finally, supply chain vulnerabilities. Log4j was a great example of these, where it wasn't just a piece of software, but it was a library that a lot of different packages of software use. And that was a really tough issue for a lot of companies to deal with. You don't know which pieces of software you have might have Log4j inside of it. And so the issues that come from these long supply chains and not knowing where every piece of your code come from really causes a lot of challenges, can lead to a lot of compromises. And that and a lot of other things work together to what I call the perfect storm for ransomware. I talked about some of these new vulnerabilities and vulnerability trends, but we also in the last couple of years had this big shift to work from home for COVID. A lot of companies very quickly spinning up new remote access services, getting a lot more employees on it, and that just created a lot more vulnerabilities, a lot more attack surface for these threat actors to try to target companies remotely. Combine that with years and years now that we've been teaching people what's essentially pretty poor password practices. An 8-character password, even if it's complex, can be cracked by a computer in 1 to 2 days. So these 8-character passwords just aren't safe. They're giving people unauthorized access to systems. And finally, cryptocurrency. The rise of cryptocurrency, the popularity has really driven attackers to do a lot more extortion attacks, ransomware attacks. And now that they can get like a 6-7 figure ransom paid essentially anonymously and essentially instantaneously using cryptocurrency. And all these things have worked together to just kind of create an environment where attackers are doing these ransomware attacks hand over fist. So that's some of the background of the ways attackers are getting some footholds and what their motivations are. Now we'll talk about some of the kind of more advanced tactics and techniques we're seeing today. One key one here when it comes to like credit card breaches is card skimming from payment pages. We see a lot of merchants nowadays are moving to either a cloud-based shopping cart that's hosted or just a hosted checkout page through a validated service provider. And it's great. It decreases the the likelihood of the breach on that shopping cart. But we're seeing attackers now taking advantage of that. One key way is just through a fake checkout page. If you look at this slide here, the top row shows a normal checkout. You've got your shopping cart. You click on the checkout form. It comes from an iframe coming from a payment gateway, a validated page there. You fill out the legitimate form, and then you click complete transaction, and it goes to the last page. Well, the attacker will create, kind of shown in red down here at the bottom, the fake failed payment page. It looks exactly like the real payment page, but it's coming from the attacker server. The attacker can steal the credit cards off that while they're getting typed in, and then maybe even still submit the credit cards to the kind of final payment gateway to complete the transaction. If you put additional controls in place to stop the attacker from kind of completing that transaction, well, the attacker then has to get a little bit more creative. Here's one way they get more creative, kind of a fake failed payment page. You can see it's got the same payment page that's cloned of the original payment page. But here the attackers really created two copies of the payment page. One that the attacker uses that they steal the card data from, and then a second one that's the legitimate one that completes the transaction. And in between them, they just produce an error message to the customer that says, hey, your transaction failed, please try again. The customer who's filling out the cart filling out the form thinks they typed in the wrong number, fat-fingered it. And so they type it in again, and everything works, and nobody knows that that credit card got stolen along the way. And then another interesting technique that we've seen is bypassing them by basically proxying that payment page, where from the customer's perspective, they never leave the shopping cart website, but the attacker has added some kind of backdoor code on that website that actually turns the web server into a proxy for that payment page and causes the web server to reach out to the payment page, get its contents, show it on the screen to the customer, and it's basically a man-in-the-middle attack where the attacker can grab those card numbers as they're going through the web server to the real payment page. So lots of tricky techniques that attackers are kind of fighting against this transition to cloud and validated service providers that merchants need to be aware of. Another kind of trend we're seeing in the techniques here is using trusted services to host that malware, whether it's hosting some kind of virus or command and control agent that gets downloaded to a web server or to a Windows computer and running there to give the attacker a backdoor, or whether it's card skimming JavaScript that gets downloaded to the customer's browser as they're filling out the checkout page. Attackers have found that there's a lot of different sites online where they can host this malicious code. Now it's not on the web server, so the merchant doesn't see it. It's not on the checkout page. It's on this other trusted page somewhere on the internet that gets past content filters and other things because it's trusted, because of where it's coming from. And then bypassing multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is not a one-size or fixes everything type solution. Attackers are finding multiple ways to get around this. One common social engineering attack starts with an attacker who has your password, who has your user ID, but knows that they need to get the second factor authentication from your phone. What they'll do is they'll get ready to log in, say it's for your bank account. So they're getting ready to log into your bank account, and then they will call you and say, hey, this is your bank. We think something funny is going on. We want to secure your account, but I need to prove you are who you say you are, so I'm going to send you a multi-factor code on your phone. Read that off to me, and then I'll know you've got your phone. You are who you say you are. And while they're pretending to send you a code, they're actually logging into the bank website. The bank website sends you the code, and then you read that code off to the attacker, and they can log in as you. So again, sophisticated kind of social engineering, taking advantage of the complexity of different ways that that multi-factor codes are happening through the phone system today. Another common one is just the employee apathy towards those multi-factor authentication prompts. As all of us get more multi-factor authentication mechanisms going, more and more we're seeing prompts on our phone all day long while we work that say, are you trying to log in? Do you use this service? Things like that. And we've had multiple cases where accounts got breached just because the employee got lazy and clicked OK on a prompt that they shouldn't have clicked OK on because they get so many all day long. And finally, man-in-the-middle attacks that target session identifiers. If the attacker doesn't need your user ID and password, if they can get your session identifier. The screenshot here is a tool called EvilGenix. That's a purpose-built tool for doing exactly these kind of man-in-the-middle attacks to catch those session identifiers. You combine it with like a phishing attack that try and get somebody to log into their mailbox. They think they're logging into their mailbox. They're actually logging into a clone of that Office 365 or Google or whatever site it is. It looks exactly the same. It behaves exactly the same, but it's actually a man-in-the-middle site that the attacker created using this tool. Allows them to catch those session identifiers and log in, even if there's multi-factor authentication in place. And that's just a sample of the tools and techniques that these attackers are using. Again, going back to the perfect storm for ransomware, the attackers have a motivation to do these attacks. They're making a lot of money off of them. And as a result, it's worth it for them to use pretty sophisticated tools, pretty sophisticated techniques. A lot of these tools and techniques that used to be reserved just for like nation state attacks or like large retailer attacks, things like that, are being used against like mom and pop manufacturers, against small e-commerce sites, against pretty much anybody who's got a connection to the internet, because it's worth it for the attacker to get that installation and steal card numbers, or to do a ransomware attack, and take somebody's business down just for a few days can often lead to a pretty good financial payout for the attacker. So now that we've looked at the different threats, like what can we do about that? What can we do to protect against these threats? Well, there are a number of basics that you almost surely already know about. We've talked about multi-factor authentication for years now, but we still see a lot of gaps in it, especially gaps for not just VPN, but all remote access. That includes email access. We see a lot of email account takeovers today. And that includes for like an e-commerce site, not just for the operating system of the server, but for any employee that logs into that site. We see a lot of attacks that happen because an employee level user who maybe just adds product images or processes orders, if the attacker can log in as them, maybe they can sneak in some JavaScript or do some other kind of attack to change the payment flow and steal cards. Commercial antivirus installed everywhere with bells and whistles. What do we mean by that? Well, I see a lot of cases where rework breaches that the company didn't have antivirus installed everywhere. They're like, well, we didn't put it on the database server because that was already having performance issues. And we didn't turn on the real-time scanning feature on this server. We just have it do nightly scans because we don't want to slow that server down. And they just forgot to put it on some workstations because they were busy with other things. And those are the gaps that let the attacker get a foothold, stay on the network, do a more sophisticated attack. Next one, patch management. Everybody knows patch management for operating systems and things like that, but patch management for firewalls and VPN devices, that wasn't on people's radar, and it led to a lot of breaches. Passwords, passphrases of 15 characters and unique passwords per system. So like I said, we've been teaching people terrible password practices for years. And I've got a little graphic here at the bottom of the screen that shows how I like to describe the difference between passwords and passphrases to people. On the left-hand side there, you'll see a password. It's the word Spartans, but it's in leet speak. It's got numbers and characters and things like that. It ends up that that's a hard password for somebody to remember. They'll probably write it down. It's hard to type in, but it's actually an easy password for a computer to guess. If I get that password encrypted off a network or server, I can decrypt it or crack it in less than 2 days. Whereas over on the right, we've got a nonsense phrase, flying purple 50-gallon snail. It's actually, from a mathematical standpoint, just as strong as the complex password, but from a human standpoint, it's actually stronger, but from a human standpoint, it's easy to remember. If I asked you a month from now what that password was, you're probably going to picture a flying purple snail flying over a 50-gallon drum, and you'll probably remember the password. Easy to remember, easy to type in, and again, mathematically, much harder for a computer to guess or crack than our typical 8-character passwords today. System hardening. There's some key things here. On web servers, things like making sure that the web directories don't allow writing of files. We see a lot of backdoors get installed because people have just poor system hardening on web servers. On Windows system, there's some key settings around legacy Windows protocols and SMB signing and things like that, that if they're not in place, can allow attackers to very easily elevate to admin privileges and things like that. So a lot of value in that system hardening that people are overlooking today. phishing awareness exercises, and not just phishing, but like I said, include some of the social engineering attacks against multi-factor tokens, so people are aware of those and more wary to not fall victim to that. And then cyber liability insurance. If you have a breach today, the difference between having the funding to investigate and respond correctly, appropriately, because you can hire an incident response firm, you can hire a legal counsel, do all things right is so much better than trying to basically deal with a breach and not having the funding to do it. And then some emergent security controls that should be on your radar if they aren't already. The first one, endpoint detection and response. This is like the next generation of antivirus. It's kind of like combining some incident response and monitoring and real-time intrusion detection with your traditional antivirus, making every device on your network a sensor for security issues. The next one, protected backups. So in ransomware attacks, we're seeing more and more that the attackers are sniffing around the network, finding passwords for backup systems, and deleting the backups before they encrypt all the data or steal all the data. And that and even going as far as to reset a storage appliance back to factory defaults to make sure all that data is destroyed. So if you've got backups and they're on your network, on a server or computer on your network, you need to make sure that there's a copy offline, a copy in the cloud, or put that server behind some multi-factor authentication to protect those backups during a ransomware attack. And then filtered outbound traffic. So your firewall is a great opportunity to catch and block what's called malware command and control, that channel that the attacker sets up that lets them steal data, instruct internal computers to spread malware. They need that command and control channel, and your firewall can block that if it's configured correctly. Configured correctly means things like web content filtering to block bad categories and block any site that's not categorized as a good site. And then defining by default all those other internet protocols on the way out so that attacker just can't reach out to the internet and talk to its command and control servers. A few more emerging controls. Protective DNS. So DNS is the protocol that turns the domain name into an IP address out on the internet. Protective DNS services know about good sites, know about untrusted sites, and if your computer tries to do a DNS lookup for what's ultimately a phishing site or a malware command and control server, these protective DNS services will fail that DNS request and just make it impossible, again, for that attacker to build that malware command and control channel. Extending workstation management and filtering controls to at-home users. This has been a challenge for a lot of companies. They used to have every computer was in the office most of the time where it could get patches and antivirus updates and Active Directory domain policies, but now that they're at home, you need to often add a new tool, a cloud-based tool, to have that same level of security and control at your fingertips for these laptops that never come into the office anymore. Logging. Logging is a real big issue when we do incident response. If you come to me and say, hey, the attacker broke in last week, and can you tell us how he first got in, how long has he been there, and your logs only go back a few days, which is the default for like Windows Active Directory security event logs, I'm not going to be able to tell you. Those logs are gone before you ever hired us to come in and investigate the incident. And then looking at managed security service providers or security event management solutions, this is, again, should be on everybody's radar. This is the way you catch that ransomware attacker, that card theft malware, malware command and control, things like that. How you catch that before the attacker is able to lurk and really perform a long, drawn-out attack. Getting one of these services that look for those anomalies in your logs and tell you about it so you can respond to it. And then periodic testing of security controls. These are things like penetration tests, risk assessments, vulnerability scans. Just putting the control in place isn't often enough. We find a lot of times those controls are misconfigured until somebody actually tests them, looks at them, and tells you what's missing or what was set up wrong. So all these things definitely should help you increase your security posture and defend against a lot of today's cybersecurity threats. Thank you.